This last August, the IPCC released a report stating that irreversible damage has been caused to Earth's climate stability. In the wake of this, many have looked to the world's leaders with hope of moving towards a carbon-neutral future. Enter Joe Biden, the newly elected president who ran on vows of a greener, renewable infrastructure. But after nearly a year in office, what promises has Biden kept? And where has he slipped up? During his debates against Donald Trump in 2020, Joe Biden promised he would make historic steps in America's fight against climate change, with the goal of carbon neutrality no later than 2050. He showed signs of an administration that would approach the challenge of climate change as one of national importance, with policy that respected scientific warnings. Now, nearing the end of 2021, Biden has mostly kept true to his word, making some positive steps in lowering US carbon emissions. One of the first things he did upon taking office was to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. By doing so, he has pledged for the US to reduce carbon emissions as swiftly as possible and keep global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius. On the same first day in office, Biden canceled all progress on the Keystone XL pipeline running from Alberta to Nebraska. This initial resistance to future fossil fuel infrastructure showed a switch in the federal stance on climate change.
I think I know more about the environment than most people.
Being symbolic as well as practical. However, after these day one victories for decarbonization, the Biden administration was faced with more systematic challenges. One of the largest issues with lowering carbon emissions is trying to modernize fossil fuel transportation. The old gasoline and diesel engines are just plain dirty, and their newer compressed natural gas engines still do not solve the problem of fossil fuel dependence. Not to mention, the electricity that electric vehicles run on has to come from renewable sources, otherwise it defeats the purpose of switching. To move buses, trains, cars, and trucks all to sustainable electric engines is no cheap feat. That is why the Biden administration moved to include funding for both of these and more in his recent $1 trillion infrastructure bill. He has already passed the bill through the Senate with bipartisan support, but the vote is still waiting on the House. But even if it passes, will it be effective in fighting climate change? Some of the largest moves in the infrastructure plan involve modernizing transportation and America's electrical grid. $174 billion would go towards a shift towards electric vehicles in the public and private sectors. Tax credits would be given to people who make the switch, along with funding for 500,000 more charging stations nationwide. $100 billion would be used to update the electric grid to better handle the output from solar and wind, and to stop huge power outages such as the one that hit Texas in February 2021. Another $85 billion would be sent to public transit systems, such as Amtrak trains, that were hit especially hard by the pandemic. Best of all, a large share of money to fund these projects would be taken via higher corporate taxes, addressing the growing wealth of the largest contributors to climate change. As seen here, the richest 10% contribute to nearly half of all global emissions. The rest would be funded by ending federal fossil fuel subsidies, which add up to $20 billion every year. While on the surface, this infrastructure plan seems like a massive step forward in lowering US emissions, there are some parts that raise concerns with scientists and environmentalists. First off, it includes $8 billion in funding for hydrogen fuel. On the surface, this would appear to be a positive, as hydrogen is a clean-burning fuel that emits nothing but water vapor as exhaust. However, the most common process of making hydrogen fuel is known as steam methane reforming, which accounts for 95% of the production of hydrogen. This method heats methane with ultra-hot steam to produce hydrogen and carbon dioxide as a waste product. This completely defeats the purpose of using hydrogen as a clean fuel if the cheapest process of making it is dirty. While $8 billion is still only a small fraction of Biden's total infrastructure plan, the money may be more useful elsewhere to seriously lower carbon emissions. Another concern is the plan's proposal to increase spending for carbon capture and sequestration by up to $10 billion. While this again seems to be a good idea, there are issues with this technology that may end up doing more harm than good. The topic of carbon capture and sequestration is a complex topic that deserves its own video, but I'll cut to the chase. There are technologies that exist that can chemically pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. However, this process is expensive, and the only end product that can be sold to recover the money lost is carbon dioxide, a cheap gas with low market demand. Currently, one of the only industries that does buy captured carbon dioxide is the oil industry, for use in enhanced oil recovery. This is where an empty oil well is pumped full of pressurized carbon dioxide to bubble any residual oil out of the reservoir, leaving the carbon dioxide underground. If this captured carbon is just going to be used to pump more fossil fuels out of the ground, it may as well not be captured. Alternative storage solutions and alternative buyers for the carbon dioxide would be necessary if carbon capture is to be successful. And in a world with continuous carbon emissions, carbon capture may be necessary to avoid the worst outcomes. So, despite some issues in the infrastructure bill, it seems as though Biden's plans to address climate change are on the right track. But he doesn't seem to have the same priorities when it comes to oil pipelines. In May 2021, Biden gave the green light on a Trump-era oil pipeline in Alaska, which would produce about 100,000 barrels of oil a day for 30 years. The project, known as Willow, is funded by the oil and gas company ConocoPhillips, a major lobbying force and a direct benefactor to both Joe Biden and Donald Trump during their campaigns. And this is not the only pipeline project he has failed to stop. The Dakota Access Pipeline, the subject of the Standing Rock protests, has not yet been stopped by Biden, despite the operations taking place without federal permits. The same situation is taking place with the Line 3 pipeline, passing through treaty-protected indigenous lands. Both the Dakota Access and Line 3 pipelines have been defended by the U.S. Army Corps and the previous administration. If Biden is to be taken seriously with his stance on climate change, then actions need to be taken to stop the construction of more fossil fuel infrastructure. Allowing the pipelines to be built would be a blow to the indigenous rights, climate change, and renewable energy promises that were made during his campaign. Like many politicians attempting to make meaningful cuts to emissions, there are roadblocks and systematic problems that the Biden administration must overcome. The steps he has taken so far are in the right direction after 4 years of climate science denial, but there is still lots of uncertainty for the future. As seen with the construction of oil pipelines, both Democrats and Republicans are guilty of accepting handouts from the fossil fuel industry. It is important to keep this in mind and watch the next 3 years of Biden's administration closely, making sure he stays true to his word. While things may look more hopeful than before, there is no longer any time to waste on delaying policy. The decisions made today will have massive impacts on the climate tomorrow, and may mean the difference between moderate warming or a hostile climate collapse. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the video and whether or not you agree with the points we brought up. Politics is always a polarizing issue, and we tried to give a comprehensive overview of the pros and cons of Biden's policy. Subscribe, share, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, or dislike it if you didn't. I'll see you next time.